through executing the governor's executive order to form the E911 agency. And hey, Chairman. And so in doing that and putting that governance structure together under the leadership of Director Homer Bryson and Michael Nix, we have an opportunity probably for the first time in 20 plus years to try to work on a coordinated statewide emergency communications network. Given all that has occurred over the last decade and 18 years, it seems to me that we're past due in having this thorough discussion. So I want to commend the governor. I also want to commend Colonel McDonough, because in my early years, my first year and second year of being a chairman of this committee, he had some very forthright discussions with me about some of these needs. And I appreciate that. I appreciate the candor, the honesty, and the straightforward manner in which both he conducts himself and which he communicated those items to me, even if it was by a very firm handshake. So the issues we have before the committee today are actually very important, and I hope that the public that tunes in to hear the committee reports from the agencies will be paying close attention. So I'm excited about the E911, current situation. I'm also excited that we're moving legislation, I hope, through this session to address this. We tried it last year. The legislation had some administrative flaws in it that hopefully will be addressed this year. But the importance of being able to ensure that our citizens, when they make a call for 911 services, that they receive those public agency services as promptly and effectively as possible, is the imperative of having that 911 charge on everybody's bill across this state. And we have to ensure that that is getting done correctly and well, and that the monies that are due the local governments that are providing the services are collected and remitted to them. And then going beyond that, we also have to be cognizant of how important it is that our state and all of our agencies, our first responder agencies, have a good, solid network, a backbone in which they can communicate, they can share information, needed information in emergency events, and can respond quickly with the appropriate measured service that is needed. And then in addition, we have a presentation from CJCC today that is complex, and I will urge the board members to try to pay close attention to it. There are a lot of steps in it, but it's important that you try to understand why the department is proposing what they're proposing, how it's working thus far, and why it's needed going forward. But it is complex. I just want to prep you for that when you go through it. We appreciate all of you being here. We appreciate the men and women that serve the state in each one of these agencies, the duties and the responsibilities that they perform on a daily basis to keep our state safe, our citizens better protected, and also to protect those that are on the front lines doing their jobs to ensure our safety. And so with that, what I'll do is I'll ask that our first presenter come forward. Director Homer Bryson, if you would come forward from GEMA to talk about the presentation that is before the committee. We all have a handout from Homer that's before us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee members. And yes, you should have a very short presentation in front of you that we're going to be working off of. To begin with, first page is the amended FY budget, and to not belay anything, all we have is the statewide changes. So I'm sure you've heard statewide changes several times by now and are familiar with those, and so we will just move on from there. On the next page, I do want to talk for just a moment about 19. And the reason that I want to do that is because, as the chair just mentioned about our 911 authority, if you're looking at FY19 agency budget request, of course you have the statewide changes that all the agencies have, but then the bottom two lines under state funds is the local government 911 authority. As the chair said, last year, the governor vetoed a bill related to creation of a local government 911 authority, and then followed that up with a executive order establishing that function within the GEMA Homeland Security Agency. And we brought Michael Nix on board to be our director of the 911 authority, and we were able to cover his salary for that period with existing funds in our budget. However, moving forward, FY19, we do not have that flexibility in our budget, so we are asking for an increase there, which is basically one position, and that's Michael's position, to serve as executive director of the 911 authority. Hopefully, as this body moves forward and we move legislation forward, the bill as in concept now, we would actually receive a small percentage of the fees collected, and we would manage our cost internally moving forward out of that and not use taxpayers' dollars for that. We also have a one-time equipment reduction in our 19 budget, and that was just one-time equipment purchases for 2 positions within our agencies. And that's actually all the changes we have in amended and also in FY19 budget. Next page, 2017 disasters and emergencies. Just wanted to run this, kind of share this with everyone. About 15 months ago, we had Hurricane Matthew, and it seems like that opened the floodgates in our state, and we have sort of gone from one event to another since Matthew. And if you will look at this, you can see you move through the North Georgia fires, then we had tornadoes, 2 separate tornado events, primarily in southwest Georgia. We had a low pathogenic avian influenza outbreak in our commercial poultry operation. Everyone knows how important poultry is to our state economically. And this has been a big issue that we have worried about for many years. And Department of Agriculture, GEMA Homeland Security, and many other state agencies, forestry, public safety agencies have worked for years to develop a plan in case we do have an outbreak. Well, we finally had one. It was up in the northwest corner of the state. It was tested positive in one of our commercial facilities. Tennessee had an outbreak, and Alabama had an outbreak. And I'm proud to say that we were the only state between the 3 that was able to manage our outbreak and control it strictly at the state level. We did not have to bring in the U.S. Department of Agriculture to assist with that. We've actually asked them for their cost to manage that in our 2 neighboring states, because we like to compare what it cost us versus their involvement, but they haven't been forthcoming with that information yet, which to me speaks volumes. Of course, the I-95 bridge collapse, we helped with some of the initial work with that and declaring a state of emergency, which would sort of facilitate the freeing up those federal dollars to come to us. Wildfires in South Georgia. Then we had a second hurricane, Hurricane Irma. And intermingled with all of this, we've had 4 separate winter weather events. I've actually started, when I'm speaking to groups, I actually talk about events and disasters, and I've sort of just rolled into my standard presentation now. The weekend before the legislative session, we're going to have a winter weather event in Atlanta. And we're not sure what y'all are doing, but a little help with that would be greatly appreciated. If you'll look over on the right-hand side of that slide, you can see total dollars that are coming to our state due to these disasters. And so it's a large influx of federal dollars that are designed to help the individual that has damages and losses, and also help local governments and municipalities with their losses. Pretty significant amount of money, and we're responsible. We're sort of the agency that serves as the go-between between the local governments and FEMA, and ensuring that the paperwork is we all know it's always about the paperwork when it comes to the money, to make sure the paperwork's done correctly in a timely manner, and we're working very hard to get those funds back to those local governments. Our next major division, emergency management, of course, is one of our major operational divisions. We also have a Homeland Security division. I want to talk about it just a little bit and some of the things that we have done there over the past year. Critical infrastructure. We have a lot of critical infrastructure in our state, and in the climate that we live with terrorist activities and just people, it seems like, with axes to grind, we're always concerned about those. And so we have a crew on staff that will go to facilities and assess those facilities related to Homeland Security. We've done a number this year. Just an example of some of those is the World Congress Center. And of course, we were heavily involved with the planning for the Super Bowl that's coming up next year, and with the college championship game that was just held. A school food defense project. There's a few major distributors of food that goes into our schools, and we want to work with those major facilities in our state to harden those facilities to ensure that our food that are going into our schools are as safe as they possibly can be. It's a joint project between us and the Department of Agriculture, and we're extremely proud of that. We do funnel through federal dollars for different projects. One of those that came on board with us many years ago that has really taken root and grown in our state, and that's EOD canines. Through the use of federal funds, we have stood up and equipped 45 canine teams in our state. Most of these go to local governments. Part of the rationale of that federal dollars is if you agree to take this and bring it on board your local agency, if we need it at the state level to assist with something, then it has to be available for us. So we have a person on staff that manages this program and manages the use of these bomb dogs around the state. And you can see just in this past year, they've worked 113 different events. And it's really, it varies from, of course, your football events, Peachtree Road Race, NASCAR, the Ports Authority, and just a number of different events. They conducted over 2,000 security sweeps last year and responded to over 500 calls of suspicious packages within our state and 189 bomb threats. Our training unit for GEMA Homeland Security is housed within Homeland Security. That's a change that we made last year in our organizational structure. Just this year, we've trained over 12,000 students through 531 different courses. Most of those courses relate to emergency management, school safety, and Homeland Security. Exercise unit, plan, training, and exercise. When we're not actually deployed, we're not actually working an event, then that's really our focus, because we want to be well prepared and plan and know how to manage an event when it occurs. We had 47 exercises with over 3,500 participants this past year, and they range from winter weather exercises to hurricane exercises to security exercises related to our ports, to our nuclear power plants.
Mr. Director, there's a couple of questions that popped up. Let me go ahead and try to get those answered while we're sitting here, if we could. Vice Chair Rogers, you had a question?
I did. I wanted to pick up just real fast, Ms. Bryson. When you were talking about the World Congress Center there, okay, so you guys are involved in the assessments of that or whatever. Are you talking about the complete World Congress Center, or, I mean, the entire complex as far as like Centennial Park? It used to be that the Dome was included, but it's not. And where does Mercedes-Benz Stadium fit into this? And also, as part of that entire complex, I know that we have the Savannah Civic Center and everything else. So can you kind of expand on that a little bit and tell me where we are from that perspective?
Yes, sir. And you're correct. When we had the Dome and it was all under state ownership, honestly, you had sort of one command and control structure for that entire piece of property, so to speak. And so it was managed that way. With Benz now, it's a private operator, and they do pull in a lot of private security but we still.
As evidence that the National Football Championship game trying to get in?
Yeah, I think there's some lessons learned there for sure. But what they've done there is they're partnering with Atlanta PD and with the World Congress Center Police Department. And so the World Congress Center Police Department is pulling in their partner agencies like State Patrol, GBI, us, and our bomb dogs. And so we all still partner and work that. The structure of it's a little different than it used to be when it was one operation. It's a little more complicated now and a little more complex, but we're still involved with it as the other public safety agencies in the state are. And when you're bringing in that many of our citizens to a high-profile event or facility such as that, we think it's prudent to still be involved with that.
I think it's real important. The other thing I was asking, since you're doing the Savannah Civic Center, you're down there, and you're also dealing on the canine aspect with the Port Authority. Are you doing assessments with the Port Authority also?
We work hand in hand with the Port Authority. We've done an exercise there. Their security folks are part of our Homeland Security Task Force, so we stay in constant contact with them. Outside of a terrorist event, we also coordinate with them heavily with the hurricanes and what they're doing operationally, closing down the port, and when they anticipate being operational again, so that we coordinate both with them, the local government, so that when we're communicating to the public, hopefully we're all communicating the same message.
That's great. And then the only last thing is see that you're working with the wireless network for the public safety community as far as broadband goes. If you get any good ideas out of that, would you pass them on to the rest of rural Georgia?
We've had several sidebars in the last few days about if this may wind up being part of that conversation.
It may be.
Be interesting to see where y'all take that.
Thank you.
Chairman Green has a question as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you well know, that in Southwest Georgia we have been very, very hard hit. And one of the things that is of great concern to my counties is the 911. Our revenues are so far down, and newspaper accounts have not helped try to explain that either to Southwest Georgia on that. We have set up the regional 911, and now we do not have enough money to actually proceed, to pay some of those. So I'm gonna need someone to help in rural South Georgia to work with me to try to work with these counties there. The other thing is with the broadband initiative, as the Vice Chairman has already talked about, rural South Georgia is in deep trouble with our communication. If it was not for our State Patrol being in those areas and working with these local officials, we would be in worse shape than we are. We've got to have some type of input from the members of the legislature and these rural areas to try to solve that. Our equipment's so antiquated and out of sort there, we just cannot communicate in Southwest Georgia. And so keep that in mind as we go along.
And part of the rationale of the bill, we hope that'll be forthcoming shortly, related to 911 centers. And there was agreement last year with this between local government and state and many of the private providers too. And that regards funding. And built into the bill from last year, and we're bringing that forward this year too. Pretty much the same format is, if passed and once this is set up and operational, this would bring additional dollars to those local 911 centers and those local communities.
We hope so. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And just keeping things a little bit separated, when we're talking about broadband, we're talking about your commercial internet providers as opposed to an emergency communications network. And so there's a meaningful distinction between those two. And I don't disagree that in our rural communities, which I represent a portion of as well, there is a need for enhanced broadband and some efforts in that regard. But I do believe these are two separate issues. Please proceed, Mr. Director.
Well, basically, you've actually hit on sort of next steps for us as an agency. One is working with you this session regarding the 911 bill and where we move forward with that and how we put that in place and operate that. FirstNet and AT&T to build, operate, and maintain a wireless broadband system for the public safety community in our state. It is separate from general broadband. I do think there's potential for some overlap there, but it is a separate issue. The governor opted in December to join the FirstNet and for AT&T to be the a vendor for that. We have been meeting with AT&T along with OPB and GTA. Have a contract in place now. In fact, probably tomorrow I will be sending out a memo that'll go to all the state public safety agencies, and we'll also send out to the local governments and local public safety community just to make them aware of the governor opting in, who the vendor is, a little bit of pricing information, but more importantly, the contact information for AT&T is who they need to be talking to see if moving to AT&T makes sense for their local agency or not.
Still, we touch on this for a second. Explain for the committee and the public, when we talk about FirstNet, we're talking about a digital communications network, but would you explain a little bit more about that? After 911, one of the issues that came to the forefront was the inability of public safety agencies to communicate with one another, and so in the many years since then, FirstNet was sort of established by the federal government to look at this issue and make recommendations. They finally got to the point where they put it out for bids. But basically there will be a dedicated amount of broadband space that is sold or leased to AT&T for public safety use. They have the ability to use some of that broadband for other uses. However, in an emergency, public safety will always have first priority. We'll be able to bump other systems, private systems, individuals off to ensure that public safety agencies can communicate. And it is broadband now. It's really more geared to being able to use the CAD, the computer-aided dispatch systems that are in most law enforcement vehicles now. But it eventually, I think, in years to come, will roll more into voice too. I think it's a way to consolidate and a lot of potential there. Next generation 911 is on the horizon. Bringing that conversation into the FirstNet, AT&T conversation, I think makes sense for all of us. We've all worked in a vacuum in this state for many, many years when it comes to communications in the public safety realm. We're our own worst enemies sometimes. We got our little turf, and we like to play in our little turf, and we don't share very well. And it's really to the point now that we have to look at how we can work together and how we can piggyback together on systems to be cost effective, and also to make sure that we've got the ability to communicate from agency to agency. That's a priority for the 911 authority. If when we're established, I'm going to say when we're established, not if we're established, but that's something we'll be working to as part of this whole process, is building out the 911 systems in the local communities, in the rural areas. Increasing that interoperability statewide has been an issue for us. I've been in law enforcement for over 30 years, and we've been talking about it for 30 years, and we've yet to do anything about it, and I think this is really a good first step in moving to that finally. Good, and as you do that, I'm sure that the agencies will talk with DNR and Department of Corrections, because we have towers and antennas all over the state.
Well, and we've had that conversation with AT&T, is because part of this is they have to guarantee coverage, a certain percentage of coverage within our state. And those areas where they have issue with coverage, we have asked them, suggested to them, and we've given them this information. We've got, the state has a number of tower sites and tower space available, and let's look at those and see if we can partner on those before you have to go out and build complete new infrastructure to get the coverage we need. It's more cost effective and it can be done quicker. And we've also suggested to them, and this will be in the memo that goes out tomorrow to those local governments, is they should do the same. If they're in an area where their AT&T coverage is not where it needs to be, and they have tower space, the local community does, have those conversations with AT&T and see what you can work out versus having to wait on land to be purchased and towers to be built and the cost associated with that. The only other thing that we have moving forward this next year is there's a second piece of legislation that us and the GBI both are supportive of. The last several years here in the legislature, there's been a lot of conversation about GSAC, the Georgia Information and Analysis Center, and how it operates and how it works. And the reality is, the way it is currently set up is you have two masters in law over one facility, GEMA Homeland Security and GBI. Well, we all know that you really can't have two bosses running one business. And so myself and our Homeland Security staff and GBI and Director Keenan, we worked over this summer and have come up with a recommendation for you to consider that we think enhances Homeland Security and makes us a more streamlined, better operation. In short, what it does is it gives operational control of GSAC to the GBI. It takes our Homeland Security field coordinators and gives them law enforcement certification. We're tasked with Homeland Security, but we really don't have the authority to be a player in that realm at the level that we need to be. And we think if our Homeland Security field officers and analysts at GSAC are certified law enforcement, then the sharing of communication is much simpler and much more straightforward. And so that's the two major things that bill does. And Mr. Chairman, that completes our report.
Thank you, Mr. Director. I appreciate it. Any further questions from members of the committee? Great. Well, thank you very much.
Thank y'all.
Appreciate you. Next on our agenda, we have CJCC, the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council. Colonel was trying to.
Colonel was trying to jump up there.
That's right.
Are you eager, Colonel?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, it's always an honor for me to be able to come back before this committee and spend a few minutes. I appreciate the opportunity. I know that the most important thing for us to do today is talk about the e-criminal file, e-filing. We'll do that in just a couple minutes. I won't take but just a few minutes in setting that up.
Let me interrupt just real quick, Mr. Neal. What we have, just for your following along, on section 30.5, it's page 13 of your track pages. That's where you'll see their request for the amended. And so if you want to look there, you can see what he's going to talk about there. But then he also
30.5.2, yes.
We have a handout here from them. Let's see.
So there are a couple things in front of you. One will be the e-filing project that we'll get to in just a couple minutes. There's also just a fold out sharing with you a little bit about the numbers of 2017 and what CJCC has done. We will be getting these, you all have those today, but we'll be getting these to each of the legislators in the coming week or two, along with a letter that highlights what's happened in the counties where your district lies. For example, Mr. Chairman, I have your letter pulled up in front of me. We've distributed $1.4 million in the counties that you represent. We've served 3,012 new victims, for example. And there's some other information that'll be in those letters as well. You'll be getting those letters within the next week or two. Also, one thing from last year before we get into the e-filing project, one of the things that you did in the fiscal year 18 budget was an increase in domestic violence funding. And then also, line 14, you said yes to increasing the Victims of Crime Act grant funding for domestic violence shelters. We just wanted to report to you, Mr. Chairman, that we recently awarded those grants for the domestic violence shelters. Came in just barely under $7 million new dollars that went out to the domestic violence shelters with the VOCA funding in this last cycle. Now, I know what you really want to talk about today is the e-filing system, and we have the presentation in front of you. We're going to, one of the things that CJCC does best, the Criminal Justice Coordinating Councils, we coordinate among a variety of agencies, and most of what we do is in partnership with stakeholders around the state or with our partner agencies, and this is a great example of that kind of collaboration and partnership with state agencies. And I'm not going to get into who all is involved in it because it's part of the presentation that you're about to see. But we at CJCC are the bank for this project, as well as the coordination providing for the agencies that are involved in it. Some you'll see up here today, others are in the audience and will be prepared to answer any questions that you may have. We're going to begin by having Terry Hayes come up from GBI. She'll share the first couple of slides with you, dealing with the scope and the goals of the project, and then we'll have Jim Pingle come up to conclude the presentation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Good afternoon, everybody. As the director indicated, GBI there's many partners in this project, and GBI serves as a business owner for it. And so I was going to come up and give a little bit of information about the scopes and goals of the criminal justice e-filing project. As you can see in your handout, one of the first goals of the project is to implement e-filing in the criminal arena. Currently, right now, civil filings are all done electronically, and we want to move that over, the efficiency and effectiveness over into the criminal area also. Another thing about this project is we're going to build on information systems that are already in place. We're not looking to go in and go into a county and replace all the systems there. We're going to take what they currently have and build upon it so we can transfer data between the systems. Also, we're going to work behind the scenes to automate these processes. We're not looking to go in wholesale and change everything that's there. So that's going to be a big benefit to this project and to the agencies participating in it. Now, some of the goals that we talked about are we're going to streamline the exchange of criminal justice information. We're going to create timely access to these documents because we're passing them around electronically. Currently, right now, what happens is we book somebody at arrest, that information is entered electronically, it's sent up to GCIC, but then that information is printed out and it's passed over to the prosecutor. So we're spending time and energy moving that paper document over to another group. That group then takes and keys in that same data again, and then they do something with their system, and it may or may not update GCIC at that point in time. This information is then printed off and transferred again. We're going to streamline that process because, like I said, we're going to do all this information. We're going to pass around that information electronically. There's going to be triggering events that Jim's going to talk about in a little bit, where those documents or something happens with it and it says, hey, move it on to the next partner in there or make this information available to somebody. This is going to help us increase the completeness of that data at GCIC, which then makes it available to everybody else. And then we're also going to improve the consistency of this criminal justice information because, like I said, right now, it's entered, it's printed, it's rekeyed. Sometimes that data then gets misconstrued or it's not interpreted properly, and then we get a inconsistency in the data. We're going to see the consistency of that data moving forward. So that's really basically the scope and the goals of the project, and I'll turn it over to Jim Pingle, who works with URL integration, and he's our subject matter expert on this project. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Terry. Mr. Chair, members, thank you for taking the time this afternoon. So if you could turn to page 4 in your handouts. As Terry said, Terry gave an excellent overview of the project, so I think what I'll try to do is dig into some of the details and maybe go into detail as you wish. But as Terry mentioned, this is a technology project. It's about connecting these information systems together for the information to flow. But to me, and really in a lot of ways, slide 4, which lists the stakeholders involved in this project, is the most important part and the most important piece of information. The value of this project, criminal justice e-filing, is in seeing criminal justice end to end. We say as an enterprise, but as a full process rather than just the individual parts. Making sure, looking at how the information flows from the beginning of the process all the way down to the end, which in a lot of ways, as Terry mentioned, is the criminal history. So the first thing that happened with this project was getting representatives from these stakeholders, these state and local agencies, together in a room. And we had a few day-long, all-day sessions where we just mapped out the entire process. What happens now? And from that, got an idea of where the opportunities are to improve the way information flows from one system to another. So again, the big picture is composed of several constituent parts. So the next 5 slides, beginning with a slide that's titled Sheriff Exchanges, gives you a chance to take a look in a little more detail at each of those constituencies. And the way we've organized these slides is, again, to me, the business flow, the business process, and improving the way people use these systems, real people on the ground, is what's most important, but we're going to focus in these slides on the information systems where we can make some investments and improve the way these technologies, the way these systems communicate with each other. So each one of these slides will lay out for you what the computer systems are that these constituencies use on a day-to-day basis to manage their information, and then give you an idea of what information is going to be exchanged as part of this project. A lot of information, as Terry mentioned, flows on paper, or there may be some individual one-to-one exchanges between systems. What we want to do is look at the entire flow again through all of the systems. So each slide will give you some detail about what information is being exchanged, and then try to capsulate the benefits on the far right side for that constituency. If you're looking at slide 5 for the sheriffs, what do they benefit? I want to point out that these systems, jail management or records management systems that sheriffs use, Terry did a good job of saying that we're talking about leveraging the systems that are in place. This project does not mandate sheriffs, prosecutors, court clerks to use or to switch to a different system. This takes the information system that they're using, the computer system that they have already purchased or built, and builds efficient flows of information onto the next partner downstream. So those arrows back and forth on any one of these slides talk about the information flowing out of, in this example, the jail management systems, or into. Or if there's arrows going both ways, it's an exchange between, hey, give me the, in this case, if a jail query would say, public defender saying, I'd like a list of the people, the inmates who have been booked into jail, see if I have any clients that I need to interview for the next day. The jail system will send that information back to the public defender's system. Warrants are another piece of information flowing out of a jail system that's, and as you know, sheriffs at booking initiate a lot of the criminal process. So getting this information right and making sure that the information that's entered at booking flows accurately through the system, that's a big part of what this project is attempting to do. Again, end to end. Any questions at this point on the sheriff systems or on the project in general?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Did I understand you say it's voluntary with the clerks, the prosecutors, the sheriffs, or is it going to be mandated?
At this point in the pilot,
Well, at some point, it's going to have to be mandated, is it not?
This will become a statewide project. Right now, it's a pilot
Mandated.
project. We're continuing to expand out. The request in the budget this year is to allow us to go to the next group of counties.
So everyone that's, right now, all the ones that have signed up are voluntary participants in the pilot
okay.
project. But eventually, to the chairman's point, at some point, we're going to have to mandate that all these systems integrate, utilizing hopefully what will be a successful pilot program.
Correct?
Is that correct, Jay?
That is my understanding.
I mean, I don't know how it's going to work otherwise.
Terry, can you speak to that?
Really wanted, this is a proof of concept because we didn't want to throw a bunch of money into it if it's not going to work.
Right.
It's not going to work for the local agencies involved if they find this is too then there's no reason to go forward with this. If this is just proven that this does work, that it, you know, it helps the
Well-
agencies and makes them more efficient and effective in their jobs.
I assume we're not building a mousetrap. We're looking at other places that have done this already.
Yes, we've seen this happen in other places. We want to come into Georgia. We're kind of a little unique in the way our state is set up. We're independent courts and we're independent this and we're independent that. We
No,
don't have a statewide system for
our
that.
Constitution says we got a unified court system.
Our Constitution says yes, sir. Anyway, but we're looking at this, we're moving this forward. We've already identified agencies outside of this pilot that we would like to expand this to, but we've got to get this going within these pilot groups to, you know, make, like I said, we don't want to throw, you know, good money after bad money at this point in time.
Representative Gravely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'll preface it by saying I would not ask you to name names or anything like that. However, after looking at the local partners and the state partners, everyone gathered for that seminar just to get together for the meeting to discuss where we're going with this. Did there appear to be buy-in from all of these particular individuals?
There did, and that buy-in's continued from that initial meeting. They've been involved in designing this project, designing down to the technical details about what needs to be implemented. So, yes, I would say that across the board, every one of those constituencies, we've had really strong buy-in. They buy into the benefits, right, to the question about mandatory versus voluntary. As Terry said, they buy into the vision that this is going to benefit them.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
And to that end, what you'll see is through the next slides, you'll start to see how the other agencies are benefiting from building this integrated system.
Right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, very good point. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So slide 6 talks about the prosecutors, public defenders. And this is, of course, where the electronic filing happens. The public defenders and prosecutors are filing information into the courts on a daily basis. A lot of times right now it's with paper, maybe logging into a different system to file something. The idea here is those people that use those systems, the public defenders, the prosecutors, their staff, they enter information, they keep their case information up to date in their case systems. A lot of them use the tracker or the JCAT system that the councils provide. And they may be printing information out of those systems to hand deliver over to the clerk to file. The idea here is they hit a button in their systems and it files to the clerk. The clerk has an ability to review that filing and accept it. It doesn't just automatically become part of the docket. The clerk's, you know, the electronic equivalent of stamping a document and filing it in the docket. They do that through their information systems, but this all happens as efficiently as possible from one system to another, cutting down on the number of times that information has to be re-entered from one system to another. As you know, those GCIC, those charge numbers are a key to making sure criminal history stays up to date, and those can be very easily mistyped, transposed. By moving the information around electronically between systems, we reduce the errors of the risk of somebody transposing. We also get the information moving down the line a lot more quickly, efficiently as well. And you can see there that the other advantage here, as the chairman mentioned, you start to see the big picture. The information that flows from the sheriff's departments or from GCIC, from the APHIS, the booking system, from criminal history, begins to populate those cases so that they're not starting from scratch. They're not typing off of a piece of paper that came from the sheriff or from GCIC. Their information is there waiting for them to initiate a new case or to initiate a new filing. So again, the information just starts to flow more easily and keep things in sync more. You'll also notice here the arrow coming back to public defender and prosecutor case management systems. Court orders, hearings, as the clerks are docketing those things in the official record in the case, in the clerk's management system, comes back and populates that case for the prosecutor or the public defender so they know when hearings are scheduled, they know when orders have been filed, keeps their information in sync with what's in the case, what's in the official docket at the courthouse. So slide 7 starts to talks about the superior court clerks and their systems, their case management systems, which again, as I mentioned, are the official docket. And here's a really important feature about those pilot agencies, about the people that we had in that room initially and that have continued to. The pilots that we're working with represent a solid cross-section of the vendor community. As you may or may not know, the court clerks each select their own vendor for a case management system. There are a handful of major vendors in the state of Georgia. And with the pilots, we're working with 4 of the biggest vendors. It's going to cover a majority of other Superior Court clerks. So program this information once. It's all built on the same standards. So we've got these 4 different clerks vendors all building the exchanges, these information flows that you see on here the same way, using the same approach, using the same technical standards. So you can pick it up and port it over to the next county. One vendor may have 50 or 60 other county court clerk customers in the state. The rollout will be just taking what was experienced in the pilot and implementing that in those additional counties. So in that way, the pilot's going to pave the way and again, hopefully present clear benefits to those other counties to take part in this project. Court clerks are also able to, Terry mentioned triggering events. So when the court clerks hit save or they hit completed an action in their system, whether it's docketing a new hearing, in the calendar, or whether it's disposing of a case, that information is triggered to go immediately, one record, one action at a time, down to the next system, whether that's the criminal history in the case of dispositions or amended charges, or whether that's a flip a page back to the prosecutors or the public defenders in the case of court orders, court hearings. Those happen immediately. It's not this overnight batch where you kind of see what matches and see what doesn't match. It happens immediately with each one of these transactions. And then if there's an error, the receiving system has the ability to send it back and say, this wasn't right, resend it. And so you close that loop too. So the information systems, the users see right away whether what they sent was successful or not. So you improve that, clean up the errors that may occur now with hand entering of information. We mitigate those with these projects as well. Okay, we move on to the next slide is page 8. And these are some of the bigger state agencies, of course. The Department of Corrections, the relatively new Department of Community Supervision, both with their own systems. And one of the keys here is making sure that the disposition orders coming from the courts or the sentencing orders don't just show up at corrections or at community supervision as a paper document or as a PDF document, a document that's on the screen, but the actual data comes into their system. One of the goals for the Department of Corrections is to improve the certainty with which they do their time computations. So sending sentence data for each charge, and whether it's concurrent or consecutive, will help their system kind of compute the time on a given sentence for a given incarceration. And they're able to communicate back and forth. Community supervision, for example, when they have going to modify to revoke or to modify a probation sentence, they can file that directly back with the courts, initiate that whole modification or revocation process electronically, more efficiently as well. And then the final diagram, where we're talking about, we're breaking the big picture down into its constituent parts, is GCIC, and I think Terry covered that pretty well. One of the keys here is that every time that an officer, Sheriff's Department books an offender, books a defendant in a county jail, they use that automated live scan, fingerprinting. The fingerprint information comes down to GCIC and creates a new charge. That charge information will be pushed directly out to the prosecutor systems and get to the appropriate county of jurisdiction. So again, as I mentioned earlier, the prosecutors will have that information ready to start the creation of a new case or a new accusation, a new filing in court, rather than having to retype something rather than to start from scratch in their systems. And again, one of those key benefits to GCIC and to keeping the criminal history complete and up to date in a timely manner is being able to send those, if there is an error in a disposition, being able to send that directly back to the clerk or the prosecutor whose system sent that information. Get those errors resolved as quickly as possible rather than kind of waiting to cycle through an entire batch. So that is really the big picture at a high level. I didn't want to take up too much time going into detail, but we do want to entertain any other questions that you may have about the detail. And then we can wrap up by talking about current status and
Why don't you talk about the pilot projects and we'll wrap it up from there.
Okay, sure, certainly. So page 10, you have listed 5 pilot agencies, or pilot sites, pilot counties, involving multiple agencies, as you saw from that stakeholder slide. All of those groups are involved, obviously, in each one of these counties. So Bartow, Dawson, and Gordon County, we're actively working on development right now with each one of those information systems on those slides, programming this information. In the next few weeks, we'll get to actually testing how that information flows between systems and really carefully working with the Superior Court clerks, the prosecutors, the people that are actually using these systems, make sure that the information flows into and out of their systems as they expect. The end users are going to sign off on each one of these that it's meeting their needs before we move on.
Jim, let me jump in.
Yes, sir.
I've got a question from Chairman Ballinger. She's got
I have a lot of questions as far as, the pilot project and what's going on. I don't know. Apparently I'm fuzzy. But I know time is short. So perhaps we could meet at a later time and kind of more in depth review the project.
We could follow up with Chairman Ballinger because this is a very detailed process and one. But basically, what we're talking about is something that goes from arrest and booking to conviction, all the way then to sentencing and monitoring after the fact, right. So that record basically can follow the person all the way through the system, and then at each one of those steps, whether you're a APD or you're a assistant DA, you could see those records readily. And then they can be better monitored through the system. So, but I think we'll follow up, probably have another little bit of a discussion about this later. And Director Neal, probably best to go right directly to Chairman Ballinger. And if there are any others that have the concerns or questions about this, if you'll, on the committee, if you'll just send those to Courtney or myself and let me know. And then if we need to do a follow-up hearing, we can do that as well. If we need to meet individually, then we can do that as well.
I've actually passed a bill regarding GCIC, so I would be interested.
She's gonna know the details.
We'll be happy to meet with you.
Good. Well, good. And so you had the pilot project update status is here, and then I know that my colleague here to the left represents portions of Hall County. So Mr. Rogers had a question about the red dot by Hall. Could you just explain that?
Of course.
Well, actually, I've got Habersham. The
Habersham.
moved to Habersham,
That's
so
it.
I'm good.
I would like to clarify that if I could, Mr. Chair.
Right.
The red is not a question of if it's going to happen in Hall County, it's when.
Okay.
And it has to do with Hall County's timelines. The court clerk there is in the process of securing a new information system. Their vendor actually is the vendor that's providing the court system through the Administrative Office of Courts. As they're ready, as Hall County is ready, we stand ready to work with them on implementing these things. So that's why they're behind the schedule from Bartow, Dawson, and Gordon. Every expectation of that.
Well, good, Jim. Thank you very much for your
Thank you,
time. Director Neal, thank you very much for your time. Given the late hour, we're going to move right on to public safety. If we could, we'll have Colonel McDonough come up. Major Johnson, if you want to join him as well. And we'll hear from public safety. The issues that you have there deal with the trooper school and law enforcement vehicles. You have that on page 19 of your amended budget. Section 39.4 is the section that's that really delves into the amended issues. Thank you, Colonel. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, essentially we have 3 priorities in our agency. That's training and getting qualified people. It's providing the equipment that they need to do their job and the cars and the gas they need to patrol in. And on page 19 of 20, under 39.4, the governor's recommendation are in line with those priorities. 39.4.3 provides funds for the equipment and a one-time cost associated with a 175-man trooper school. That school is the 104th or 105th trooper school that is scheduled to start in August-September timeframe. and getting the funds in the amended and being able to purchase what's required to equip them prior to school meets that need. The second item is 39.4.4, provides one-time funds to purchase 93 law enforcement pursuit vehicles. It's $4 million in cash, you know we always need vehicles, so all this does is help us meet that goal. So those are the only two items that are in the amended budget, and we would love to have your support.
Colonel McDonough, we have, tell me in the past, well, two questions really. One is this is a larger number of participants associated with the trooper school, which in my recollection was more like 50 to 65, I think it was last year, if I remember correctly. Are we seeing a positive trend here, and if so, could you explain why?
In March of last year, we graduated a trooper school of 7. In August, we started a trooper school and graduated them, and it had 13. Well, the class that we had after the governor's recommendation for an across-the-board pay raise, we just graduated them on the 29th of December with 40. And we have right behind them the 102nd school, which has 42 in it. And we're just about to start the 103rd on the 11th of February, and it has 75 in it. So the proof is in the pudding. What we have seen prior to that announcement and what we have seen after is essentially our applicants for that first school double. And if you ask the fellas that do what are known as our adjunct instructors, those are the troopers that work in the posts, the folks that come and assist with firearms training, accident investigation, driver training, they say that the quality of the individual that we're getting as cadets is something they haven't seen in quite a while. So a very positive effect. An offshoot to that, we've seen our attrition drop from about 12% down to 5%. So not only in the recruitment area, but also in the retention, it's had a very positive effect for us. We lost 116 in one calendar year. And when that flywheel of recruitment and that flywheel of training slows down, it takes us anywhere from about 2.5, 3 years to be able to get that flywheel spun back up and to get going again. So we're about halfway through that cycle, and it's been very positive for us.
Vice Chairman Rogers has a question.
Colonel, just one quick question on the automobiles. What are you looking at right now as far as how many miles and how many years are you getting out of your current vehicles?
If it's a bonded car, these are cash, but if it's a bonded car, we usually try to get 5 years out of it because that's what the bond's for. But if you look at the traditional mileage usage, it's about 4 years and 11 months, no matter how it's purchased. We adhere to the standard of 135,000 miles. If you look at where our fleet was 7 years ago, our average mileage was well in excess of 140,000 miles. Since the governor's emphasis on purchasing us vehicles, we are now around the 80,000 mile average. So to go from an old fleet with high mileage maintenance issues now to a fleet that is much lower in mileage, we're not seeing those expenses.
Representative Gravely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colonel McDonough, Major Johnson, and for those in the room, I want to thank you for coming out to decommission our old headquarters post in Villa Rica and our new one. It's a very fine facility, and we appreciate you guys being out there that day. My question is, what does it cost the state from start to finish, especially with the increase that we've seen, which I'm very happy about, for a cadet to start and graduate from trooper school?
You're looking at a cost almost at $120,000. That does not include their automobile. So you take the standard automobile and with its communication, and you're looking in excess of $50,000. It's easy math. But as far as from start to finish, through a 7-month process, all of the equipment that it takes, it's about $120,000 per individual.
And Colonel, in the past we've done bonded projects for vehicles. Explain the change in philosophy to putting those as a cash in the budget.
Well, the bonding is essentially just what it is. It's a car loan. That's the way we looked at it. It's borrowed money. And so whenever you have a vehicle and all the equipment that's in it that's associated with that bond, it is an administrative tracking issue. In other words, anything that's in it that's associated with it, you have to track that as an agency, of which we do. You can even see on the numbers that are printed on the car for the fleet mileage, it has a B, which indicates that it's a bonded car. So there's an administrative aspect to it, but there is a constraint in that essentially until that car is bonded, I'm not going to say you're stuck with it, but you're living with that time frame. So when vehicles are purchased with cash, it removes that administrative burden of tracking it per the bond on the vehicle, and it also gives the agency flexibility. For instance, if we wanted to drive that mileage down even farther, from 135,000 miles down to 100,000 miles, the bond would not allow us to do that because you're going to have to keep it for 5 years in order to get that mileage on it. But if you buy cash and you wanted to drive that mileage down even further as far as your average maintenance on the vehicle, then the flexibility of spending cash allows you to do that because you don't have the constraint of waiting till essentially the car loan is paid.
Are you expecting a cost savings in terms of maintenance if you are able to drive down the mileage?
Absolutely, sir. We even have examples where the state of Kansas turns their automobiles in at 50,000 miles. And they have a vehicle sales program. If you look when you maintain a fleet, there is a mileage point at which you can get the most out of the car when you sell it. And so there are plenty of examples around the country of where that's done. But we have worked in the framework that we've been given. Something that's been very beneficial to us, if you all remember a few years back, you voted to allow us to have our own vehicle sales program. It was modeled after the state of North Carolina, and so that enables us, instead of paying to have it towed to DOAS and they sell it and keep the money, now we don't have the towing expense, and we get to put the money towards new equipment and new cars, and that's been very, very helpful.
Okay. Any other questions from members of the committee? I would like to get a little bit more information about the cost savings on maintenance and see what those numbers look like as you reduce the mileage and turn the vehicles over, what those percentages are.
And just remember, 2 years in a row, we have the best looking patrol car in the country.
Good. Thank you. Colonel, thank you so much. Major, good to see you, sir. Thank you. All right. We'll move on. I know that Chairman Ballinger has to head out, so appreciate her being here. We have one more presentation, and that's going to be from the Georgia Public Safety Training Center. Director Wiggins is here, and we'll have him present.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, committee members. I've got with me Ms. Cindy Jones, our comptroller, and we have 2 items for the amended 18 budget.
And so we're going to be on page 20 of your handout, section 39.
It would be 39.8.4 would be the first one-time purchase for 5 vehicles for our CIT program. We've requested in this year's budget to expand that program with 5 positions. These positions travel throughout the state and deliver this information throughout the regions within your districts. It's not all taught there at the center. So these individuals are assigned a vehicle. And that's what these 5 vehicles will be for. The next one is 39.8.5, which is for additional 6 vehicles. You were gracious enough to give us additional positions for our basic academies throughout the state. Those cars, we've got cars at those regional academies now. They're probably 40,000 miles on them. So we travel at those academies to ranges and other facilities. Not everything's done at the academy. So these 6 vehicles would be scattered out at the 6 regional academies. So that is the 2 requests, and I would open it up to any questions.
Any questions from members of the committee? All right, well, seeing none, Director, we thank you for being here. Thank you for the service, the training that the GIPSTIC has done for the state, throughout the state, Rome to Forsyth and beyond. And we appreciate you coming in today to present these issues to us. And I noticed that we have a little bit more in the 2019 budget to talk about, so we'll take that up in our next hearing. Well, with that, appreciate everyone coming today, and we'll stand adjourned.
Thank you.
Hey, Chris.